The wind tore through the bare branches like a scream bottled too long. Jonathan Ellis stumbled over roots and rocks, breath shallow, boots soaked in cold mud. Behind him, the forest throbbed with a soundless pressure, as though something vast and ancient had stirred beneath the soil. No footsteps followed him. No shadow leapt from behind the trees. And yet, every hair on his neck stood as if touched by fingers that weren't there. In his hand he clutched a torn page, half a map, ink smeared, a name circled twice. Ellis House. He didn't remember drawing it. He didn't remember finding it. But he had followed it all the way from Boston to this forgotten slice of Maine, hoping for peace, hoping for escape. Instead, he found trees that groaned like sleepers, and a sky too low for comfort. Before we continue, if stories of the strange and the unspoken draw you in, subscribe now. There are doors in this world best left unopened, but here we walk straight through. 3 days earlier, Jonathan had arrived in Harrowwick, a town so small it wasn't on any map newer than 1845. Nestled between rolling hills and choked pine forests, the village was more whisper than place, a scattering of buildings clinging to old roads and older fears. He was 32, with eyes that had seen too much and hands that trembled only when still. An architect by trade, recently unmade by scandal, Jonathan came here not to rebuild his reputation, but to disappear. He checked into the town's only inn, a creaking structure operated by a widow named Mrs. Tellen, who spoke more with her eyes than her mouth. That first night, over lukewarm stew, she asked what brought him. He mentioned work, possibly restoration. She stopped chewing. Her eyes slid to the window where dusk bruised the treetops. "There's a place out past Deerfield Hollow," she murmured. "Some call it the Ellis place. No one's lived there in decades. Some say no one ever did." Jonathan frowned. "But it's on the land registry." She gave a small, dry laugh. "So was Atlantis once." Intrigued, he found the library the next morning, if one could call it that. A single room behind the post office, filled with brittle papers and the smell of mildew. He requested land deeds, blueprints, anything on the Ellis house. The clerk, a rail-thin man named Reed, hesitated before producing a leather-bound ledger with shaking hands. Inside, a map, not of roads but of paths, not of structures but suggestions. The Ellis house was marked with a black cross surrounded by blankness. Beneath it, someone had scrawled, "No exits, no end." Odd, yes. But Jonathan had seen stranger. Buildings that defied logic. Spaces that seemed larger inside than out. Architecture, at its edge, flirted with madness. This, he told himself, was a curiosity, a story, perhaps even inspiration. That night in his rented room, he dreamed of staircases that curved into themselves and windows that opened onto walls. When he awoke, the map was in his hand. It hadn't been there before. 2 days later, he walked the trail alone. The forest grew denser the farther he went, the light dimmer though the sky was clear. Trees leaned inward, as though eavesdropping. Birds fell silent. Then, the wind stopped. So sudden, so absolute, it pressed against the ears. Ahead, just beyond a bend, lay something large. A silhouette. A house. Its roof bowed, its timbers black with age. No path led further, no road circled back. As Jonathan stepped closer, he noticed something deeply wrong. No door, no windows, no chimney. Only walls, blank and blind. The house was not abandoned. It had never been entered, and somehow impossibly his name was etched into the stone. The house was not merely forgotten, it had been erased. Jonathan circled its perimeter, fingertips brushing the stone as if seeking seams or handles. There were none. The walls were smooth and ancient, though no moss grew on them, no signs of decay. It was as though time had stopped here, or perhaps had never begun. He took a step back, and that's when he noticed the man standing in the field beyond. The figure was tall, wrapped in a long coat of deep navy, worn with years, but elegant still. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed most of his face. He stood motionless, hands folded before him. Jonathan blinked, startled, then waved. The man nodded once and turned, By instinct or curiosity, Jonathan followed. They walked in silence across brittle grass and into the edge of the trees. A path emerged where there had been none. It curved gently, like a memory. After several minutes, they reached a cottage, simple thatched but warm with lantern light glowing through its windows. The man opened the door without a word and stepped inside. Jonathan hesitated, then entered. The interior was richly furnished, incongruent with the exterior's modesty. Mahogany shelves lined the walls, filled with books bound in leather and dust. A fire crackled in the hearth. The man removed his coat and hat, revealing a face carved by time but dignified. His eyes, pale grey, studied Jonathan not with suspicion, but with recognition. "You're the one they sent," he said, his voice low and smooth. "The architect." Jonathan cleared his throat. "I wasn't sent by anyone. I found the house by accident." "There are no accidents here." The man gestured to a chair. "Sit. You must be cold." Cautiously, Jonathan obeyed. The warmth of the fire soothed the edge of his nerves. "My name is Elias Morrow," the man continued, "and I own the land upon which that structure stands." "You built it?" Jonathan asked, unable to hide his disbelief. Elias gave a small, mirthless smile. "No. It was there before me, and before the one who claimed the land before me. But I've been its steward, of sorts." "Then what do you want from me?" "I need it restored." Jonathan blinked. "Restored? That building has no doors, no windows. It's not even—" "It is more than a building," Elias interrupted gently. "And it is dying." Jonathan stared. "You want me to redesign it?" "No. Restore it. It cannot be redesigned. It must remain as it is, but it must be awakened again. It's sleeping now, but not for long." This was absurd, and yet something deep inside Jonathan stirred. That house, whatever it was, had called to him, had shown him his name etched in stone. He felt the hum of it still, behind his ribs. Elias leaned forward, placing a thick envelope on the table. "Inside you'll find compensation. More than fair, more than necessary. You'll live in the guest quarters. Food will be provided. You are not to leave the estate until the work is done." "That's rather restrictive." Elias's eyes gleamed. "This is not ordinary work." Jonathan reached for the envelope, hesitated, then pulled it open. Bills. Stacks of them. More money than he'd earned in the last 5 years combined. "Why me?" he asked. "Because the house chose you." Jonathan's throat tightened. He remembered the stone, the etched name. Elias stood. "You may begin tomorrow. I will escort you back. The grounds are warded. Strangers wander and vanish. It's safer with me." He led Jonathan through a back trail deeper than before. Trees whispered. The air chilled. And soon, impossibly, they emerged at the clearing again. The house loomed unchanged, yet somehow expectant. "Welcome home," Elias said, and with a final nod, turned away. As Jonathan stepped forward, the iron gate creaked open on its own. He passed through. Behind him, the gate shut with a heavy clang. When he turned to look, Elias was gone. Jonathan awoke to silence, heavy, unnatural silence. Not the quiet of isolation, but of suppression. Like the world outside had been pressed flat and sealed away. The guest room where he had slept was modest. A bed, a chair, a small writing desk. But when he moved toward the door, something was wrong. The knob was gone. In its place, a smooth, unbroken plane of polished wood. He stepped back. The walls, too, were seamless. His breath quickened. He remembered entering through the main door, remembered Elias, the key turning. But now even the windows were gone. No frames, no glass, just plaster where light once entered. He didn't scream. Architects rarely did. Instead, he pressed his palms flat to the surface and pushed. It didn't give. Then a sound behind him, not a knock, not a creak. A breath. He turned, startled. A girl stood at the edge of the room. She couldn't have been older than 12, wearing a pale linen dress, her dark hair tangled and long. She watched him without blinking, her eyes large, unclouded, and impossibly still. Jonathan stared back, unsure of what to say. "Hello," he offered, his voice hoarse. She tilted her head slightly but didn't speak. "I'm... Jonathan? I'm working on the house." Still no reply. He took a step closer and she stepped back in perfect mirror. The movement was too precise, as if rehearsed. "Are you Cecilia?" he asked. She blinked once. A pause, then a small nod. Jonathan exhaled, relieved. "You live here with Elias?" She turned and walked out of the room without a word. Jonathan followed. Beyond the guest room, the hallway extended farther than he remembered. The floors were dark oak, and the walls panelled in faded burgundy. No light fixtures, no sconces, yet the space was dimly lit, as though the air itself gave off a glow. He moved with care, trying not to lose sight of the girl. She led him down a staircase that spiraled tighter than the laws of architecture allowed. The first floor revealed itself slowly, room by room, each eerily familiar, as if copied from somewhere else. The kitchen was an exact replica of his childhood home, same chipped counter, same uneven floorboard beneath the stove. He froze. "How—" Cecilia stood in the corner, watching. He opened a drawer. Inside, cutlery, tarnished, but aligned in the same chaotic fashion his mother preferred. He touched a fork. Cold. Real. He left the room quickly. The next room was a sitting parlor, one he had designed for a client in Providence 5 years prior. The same green velvet chairs, the fireplace with the ornate lion-carved mantel. But he had never shown those blueprints to anyone. The client had died before construction began. Cecilia trailed him silently, never speaking, always watching. Another room, a dining hall with long windows painted black from the inside. No hinges, no handles, just panes covered in thick, ancient brushstrokes. He approached one, touched it. The paint wasn't dry, yet it didn't smear. It shimmered like oil. As he turned to speak to the girl, he caught sight of a mirror hanging crooked on the far wall. He stepped toward it, instinctively curious. His reflection stared back, only it wasn't quite right. The face was his, but drawn, sunken, aged. The eyes were wrong, dull and endless. And the mouth was moving, but Jonathan wasn't speaking. His breath caught. He watched in horror as the mirrored version of himself lifted a hand and pressed it against the inside of the glass, mouth still moving in silent terror. Behind him, the girl had vanished. He spun, heart racing. The hallway behind him was gone. In its place, another room, a replica of the one he had just left. He turned back to the mirror. It was empty. Only his own reflection remained, and it was smiling. Sleep came in fragments, shallow, broken things that left Jonathan more tired than before. By the time the grey morning seeped through cracks that should not have existed, he decided to document the layout. If the rooms were shifting, he needed a record. But as he walked the hallways again, he found no familiar ground. Each turn led somewhere new. The house was breathing, reshaping. On the third pass through a corridor that felt too narrow, he tripped on an uneven floorboard. Kneeling, he noticed a gap, a slim crevice where wood met wood imperfectly. He pried it open with a butter knife. Inside, paper. Dozens of folded pages, browned with age and bound by twine. He pulled them free and sat cross-legged on the floor, hands trembling. The handwriting was dense, frantic, but legible. October 3rd, 1887. My name is Henry Baines. I was brought here to redesign the foundation. I fear now I was never meant to leave. Jonathan flipped through the bundle. Each entry grew stranger, the lines more erratic. The house is wrong. I've measured the eastern wall 6 times. Each time it's a different length. I hear footsteps behind the walls. They stop when I speak. Further down, there's a girl. I've seen her twice. She smiles but never talks. The rooms react to her, follow her. She's the center, or the key. Jonathan looked up, pulse quickening. Cecilia. It had to be her. But why was she still here? One line was scrawled in thick charcoal across an entire page. Don't trust her. She's not a girl. She's the walls. He read the words again, slower, as if that might dull their weight. No name signed, no date. He returned to the top of the bundle, looking for patterns, timelines. Henry Baines had been in the house 5 years before, or longer. There were no clear days after the 3rd week, just entries scratched in desperation. The doors move. I walked through the pantry and ended in the attic. I haven't seen the sun in 4 days. I keep dreaming of the floor swallowing me. I wake and find bite marks on my ankles. If you find this, you are the next one. There's always a next. Jonathan's chest tightened. He checked his ankles. No marks, no bruises, yet. He gathered the letters and moved into the nearest room, a drawing room, unfamiliar yet containing one of his earliest design styles. There was a fireplace but no chimney. He sat before it and spread the letters again. A sudden knock echoed through the wall to his left, not from another room but from within the wall itself. One knock, then another, then a pause. He whispered, "Hello?" The knocking resumed, this time mimicking the rhythm of his own voice. 2 syllables. "Hello." Repeated, slower. He stood quickly, backing away. The wall remained still, smooth. But the knocking, soft, hollow, persisted. He pressed his ear against it. Breath. Just beyond. His fingers shook as he folded the letters back into the bundle. He tucked them into his coat and left the room, heart pounding. As he walked, the house responded. A door appeared to his left where none had been seconds before. He tried to ignore it, but it creaked open on its own. Inside was a small study. A single desk, a chair, and pinned to the wall above it a blueprint, his blueprint, from a project he had abandoned 3 years ago. It had never been published, and yet here it was, drawn perfectly, marked in red ink across the load-bearing walls. A single note scribbled on the bottom right corner would have trapped them here too. Jonathan stepped back. Behind him, a floorboard groaned. The same voice from the mirror echoed in his mind, not speaking but breathing. This house had seen other architects. It remembered every one of them. He hadn't heard a single clock in days. No ticking, no chiming, nothing. The passage of time inside the house had become abstract, measured not in minutes or hours, but in shadows that shifted when they shouldn't, and dreams that came while fully awake. So when the bell tolled 12, clear and resonant, Jonathan froze. It didn't come from above, but below. He followed the sound down a hallway he didn't recognize, past a door he was certain hadn't existed that morning. The chime rang again as he opened it, and the air changed, thicker, colder. The room inside was vast. Hundreds of clocks hung on the walls, sat on tables, lined the floors. Tall grandfather clocks towered above him, their faces blank. Pocket watches dangled from the ceiling like vines. Mantel clocks ticked in unison, each second echoing louder than the last, but none showed the correct time. In fact, none agreed with each other at all. Jonathan stepped inside. The moment he did, the door closed behind him. He turned sharply, but there was no handle on the inside. A familiar feeling crept into his spine. The clocks began to tick louder. He moved carefully between them, eyes scanning their faces. Some ran backward. Others ticked too fast, their hands blurring. One clock had no hands at all, just a hollow center with something moving inside it, slow and serpentine. In the far corner stood a massive contraption, a hybrid of gears and pendulums housed in brass and dark wood. Its center glowed faintly blue, pulsing like a heartbeat. A nameplate read, Elias Morrow, 1873. Jonathan's breath caught. So Elias had built something. He stepped closer, inspecting the mechanism. As he leaned in, one of the smaller dials shifted violently. The second hand reversed, spun forward, stopped, then snapped clean off. It flew past Jonathan's cheek and embedded itself in the wall. He stumbled backward. Suddenly, every clock in the room began to tick in perfect unison. Then silence, a soft click, and time jumped. Jonathan gasped. The room shifted around him, slightly but undeniably. The clocks were in new positions, the walls were closer. He looked down at his hands. They were older, slightly wrinkled, pale. He staggered to a nearby mirror, his face, his eyes, aged by years. "No," he whispered. A chime sounded again, this time louder. The clocks began spinning. All of them. Wildly, uncontrollably. The room darkened. Though no source of light had been extinguished, Jonathan fell to his knees. The pulsing blue core began to flicker, and then he saw himself. Across the room, standing between two massive clocks, was him. Same coat, same face. But the other Jonathan stood still, mouth slightly open, hands at his sides. And he was dead. Eyes glazed, skin grey-blue. Jonathan crawled forward, disbelief coursing through him. The figure didn't move. He reached out, trembling. As his hand neared the body, the figure blinked. Not dead. Not yet. It mouthed one word: "Run." Jonathan turned just as the clocks exploded into a cacophony of sound. Bells clanged, gears spun. The air grew electric. He sprinted toward the wall, any wall, desperate for a door, a crack, an escape. His fingers grazed a clock face. It melted beneath his touch, revealing wood, then plaster, then air. A passage. He dove through. As he collapsed onto a new floor, the sound vanished behind him. He was in another room, quiet, still. The clocks were gone, but something had followed. Not a thing, not a shape, but a loop. A rhythm, the knowledge that time no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the house, and it was winding him down. She found him slumped against the wall, soaked in cold sweat, shivering as if time itself had drained through his bones. Cecilia stood quietly, watching. Jonathan blinked several times before realizing she was real, solid. She held a piece of paper in her hands. He tried to speak, but no words came. She didn't seem to expect any. Instead, she knelt, unfolded the page, and placed it in his lap. It was a drawing, crude, in charcoal. A hallway, twisting, wrong. Its walls bowed inward, floor cracked, ceiling dripping something black. At the end, a door, or something shaped like one. And beside it, a figure. Him. She handed him a second drawing. It was of the house, viewed from above. But it was wrong, impossible. The rooms overlapped, spiraled, collapsed inward. Geometry didn't hold. Angles where none should exist. Doors that opened into themselves. He looked up. "You drew this." She nodded slowly. "How do you know what's inside?" No answer. She pulled out another drawing, this one of a door that hadn't appeared yet. Wide, tall, carved in a strange looping script. Beneath it, in shaky handwriting, "Don't open unless it's calling." Jonathan frowned. "Have you been through that one?" She hesitated, then shook her head. His voice came back in fragments. You live here." She tilted her head, not in confusion, but as if the question didn't make sense. "You were born here?" A pause. Then, to his surprise, she reached into her satchel and removed a much older piece of paper, yellowed, flaking. It bore a name in faded ink: Cecilia Morrow. Birth year, 1874. Jonathan's heart stumbled. That couldn't be right. He looked at her. The girl couldn't be older than 12. "Cecilia," he whispered, "how long have you been in this house?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed to his coat pocket, the one holding Henry Baines's letters. He pulled them out, confused. She took the top page, flipped it, and drew a quick, dark shape. A figure, thin, tall, its arms stretched too long. It had no face, just a circle of scribbled charcoal. Around it, walls, slanting, bending. She handed it back to him and pointed down the hallway. Jonathan turned. The corridor had shifted again. The floor stretched ahead unnaturally. A slow creak echoed like something pacing behind the walls. When he looked back, Cecilia had produced another sketch. This one stopped him cold. It was of him, lying on the floor, tangled in black vines, eyes open, mouth agape. The wallpaper behind him peeled in jagged lines, like teeth. "Is this the future?" he asked, voice shaking. She nodded once solemnly. His hands trembled. How do I stop it? For the first time she moved quickly, ripping another page from her notebook, drawing furiously. Her eyes locked on his, then returned to the paper. She showed it to him. It was a room with no ceiling, no floor, just falling, and in the center, a spiral door. Under it, 3 words, "Let it feed." He recoiled. Feed on what? But she wouldn't draw more. Instead, she reached into her satchel one final time and pulled out a mirror, small, cracked. She held it to his face. He gasped. His eyes were wrong, not in color, but in depth. They weren't reflecting light, they were swallowing it. "I'm changing," he whispered. She nodded. He dropped the mirror. When he looked up, she was gone. No footsteps, no sound. Just the drawing in his hand, still warm from her fingers. The wallpaper beside him had started to ripple, like something was breathing beneath it. And somewhere deeper in the house, the door she warned him of began to hum. The trapdoor appeared beneath his bed. Jonathan hadn't moved it. He hadn't even returned to the guest room since the clocks, but something, some tug in his gut, had led him back. The bed sat in the middle of the room, untouched, undisturbed. But beneath it, in place of the warped floorboard he'd first noticed days ago, now lay a square of dark iron etched with a spiral. He stared at it for a long time before kneeling. The spiral pulsed faintly under his fingers. He pulled. It opened with a hiss, and the scent that rose was not dust but earth, wet, deep, ancient. A staircase descended into darkness, stone, not wood, cold to the touch. He hesitated at the edge. The air tasted different here, heavy, metallic. There was no light, and yet somehow he could see the first few steps clearly. He began to descend. The spiral tightened with every turn. The deeper he went, the more the walls seemed to close in. There were carvings on the stone, symbols he didn't recognize. Some looked like maps, others like anatomy. All were unfinished, as if chiseled by frantic hands that had vanished mid-task. He didn't know how long he walked. Time was meaningless here. Eventually the steps ended, and he entered a chamber. It was massive. The ceiling arched high, disappearing into blackness. Bones littered the floor, not in piles but arranged in patterns, circles, spirals, lines pointing toward a central pit. He approached it slowly. The pit was shallow, more like a basin carved into the rock. Inside it lay objects, rusted tools, broken compasses, teeth, buttons, a child's shoe, and at the bottom, a photograph. He reached in, fingers trembling. It was faded, but the image was unmistakable. A group of men in work clothes, builders, 5 of them. One, at the center, stood taller, his face turned away. In the corner, a date, 1872. Jonathan's eyes dropped to the man at the far right. His own face stared back. He staggered. It was impossible. The image was old, yellowed, cracked with age. Not fabricated. Not altered. And yet he was there. He flipped the photo over, in smudged ink. Ellis, Henry, Lyman, George, Jonathan. The handwriting was eerily similar to his. "No," he whispered. A soft breath answered him. Not from behind. From beneath. The pit trembled. Jonathan stepped back as the ground around the basin shifted, stone sliding over stone. A gap widened, revealing a second staircase, narrower, descending further. A whisper drifted upward. His name. Not spoken aloud, but inside him, behind his ears, under his skin. He should have run. He stepped down instead. The next chamber was smaller. Its walls were slick, almost organic. They pulsed faintly in rhythm with his own heartbeat. He moved carefully. In the center stood a structure, more sculpture than machine. It looked like a spine rising from the floor, wrapped in wires and roots. Inside it, something glowed. Not light, memory. Visions surged through him in flashes. A child, lost in a field. A door that never opened. A house with no builder. A man screaming in a room that kept shifting. He gripped his head, falling to his knees. The memories weren't his. They were the house's. Every soul it had taken, every mind it had broken. He was just another. When he looked up, he wasn't alone. A figure stood in the doorway. Not Elias, not Cecilia. It was him, but younger, or maybe older, different. It smiled, then vanished. Jonathan ran, up the stairs, across the bones, through the carvings. The house let him go, but only just. Because now it knew him, and more terrifying, he knew it back. He didn't know how he found the hallway. His mind spun with images he couldn't place, memories not his, voices that echoed in languages he didn't recognize. His hands were scratched, his nails cracked. He'd run until his legs failed, then crawled, then walked again, then the knock. 3 slow taps on wood. He turned. Elias stood at the end of the corridor, his coat soaked in something dark. His hands were stained, not mud, not ink, blood. Jonathan froze. Elias stepped forward, calm, composed. "I told you not to go beneath," he said. Jonathan stared, his voice brittle. "What is it?" Elias didn't answer right away. He leaned against the wall, sighing like a man returning from war. "It's not a house," he said finally. "Not in the way you think. It was never built." "Then what is it? A root, a seed, a wound. Depends on who you ask." Jonathan clenched his fists. "You lied to me. I offered truth. You weren't ready for it. You said it needed restoration. It does. You said it chose me. It did." Elias stepped closer. "You think you're the first?" he asked softly. "There have been others, architects, historians, even priests, each one thinking they could fix it, understand it, cleanse it. The house welcomed them, just like it did you. But none of them came with your name." Jonathan's breath caught. "My name?" Elias reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a page. Jonathan recognized it instantly. It was from the deed ledger in the town library. The one that had shown Ellis' house, but now at the bottom in old ink, Jonathan Ellis, 1852. "That's not possible," Jonathan whispered. "I was born in 1860. "No," Elias said. "You were born in here, the first time." Jonathan took a step back. "What are you saying?" Elias didn't follow. "I've watched you before. Every time you return, you get closer. This time the house didn't need to pull you." "You came willingly." Jonathan shook his head. "This is insane. You don't remember because it keeps pieces from you, memories, time. It uses them to keep itself alive. I've never been here before. You escaped once, as a child, through a flaw in the architecture, an accident. The house closed it after you fled, but you always carried it in you." Jonathan's knees buckled. He leaned against the wall for balance. "Why me?" he asked. "Because you're not just its architect," Elias said quietly. "You're its echo, its shape. You designed this, or maybe it designed you." "No." Elias knelt, lowering his voice. "Do you remember the whisper in the wall when you were 7? The drawing you made in school, blueprints with rooms that didn't exist? The dreams of staircases that ended in nothing?" Jonathan's stomach churned. "You weren't imagining them. You were remembering." He looked up. "And you? Who are you really?" Elias smiled, but it was bitter, tired. "I was the last architect who survived long enough to understand." Jonathan felt the floor shift beneath him. "So you're trapped here too." "I was. Until I let go." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "Let go of what?" "Myself." Elias stood. "That's what the house wants, Jonathan. Not your body, your identity, your memory, your pattern. Once it has that, it doesn't need your permission. You'll become part of it, another layer, another wall." Jonathan backed away. "No, I won't become like you." Elias gave a sad nod. "You already are?" Then he turned and walked into the darkness without another word. Jonathan stood alone, his fingers trembled. He touched the wall, it pulsed beneath his palm, and somewhere within the stone he felt a heartbeat. His own. The house exhaled. It wasn't imagination nor a trick of wind. There was no wind. The breath rolled through the walls, a low vibration that passed through wood, stone, and flesh. Jonathan pressed his hands to his ears, but the sound was inside him now. The floor swelled beneath his feet, not in shape, but in sensation. It pulsed like something alive. With each beat, the air thickened. He staggered into the hallway. The wallpaper peeled slowly, curling outward like skin revealing bone. Beneath it, symbols, ancient, moving. The lights, if they could still be called that, flickered from nothing. No bulbs, no source, just raw illumination, pouring from corners that shouldn't exist. He moved without direction. The house was breathing, and it wanted him closer. He descended another staircase, one he didn't remember. The banister writhed slightly under his grip, warm like muscle. At the bottom, a wide corridor stretched endlessly. Its walls rippled. Jonathan walked. Portraits stared back at him. Faces he knew. Not people he'd met, but people he'd dreamed of. Faces from childhood, from memories buried too deep. And then, his mother, younger, smiling. He reached out, touched the canvas. It blinked. He recoiled. A door at the end of the hall opened on its own. Inside, a chamber he hadn't seen before. And at the center, heart-like, massive, alive, something pulsed in rhythm with the house. Wires extended from it like veins. The floor below it cracked, glowing faintly red. The smell of rust and soil and memory filled the air. He stepped forward. Every instinct screamed to run. But curiosity had long since replaced fear. He moved closer, studying the structure. It wasn't organic, not fully. It had been built, sculpted by hands that weren't human, or weren't anymore. Symbols spiraled across its surface. They moved. They breathed. It was the center, the house's heart. Jonathan reached for the base, feeling the rhythm climb up his arm, into his chest. And then, a vision. He stood in the attic centuries ago, hammer in hand, blueprints on the floor. Elias beside him, younger, smiling. He blinked. Now he was in the cellar, stacking bones in spirals. Blink. Now in the parlor, sketching Cecilia's face from memory, though she hadn't been born. Blink. He saw himself in every room, every version of himself, watching, working, bleeding. He ripped his hand away. The pulse stopped, and then the house screamed. It wasn't sound, but pressure, collapsing space. Walls slammed inward, floors cracked open, paint peeled violently. He staggered back, ears ringing. Above him, a chandelier crashed to the floor, made of mirrors, not glass. Each fragment reflected not his face, but his failures. A boy crying for help, a woman vanishing into wallpaper. A door closed forever. He screamed and ran. The house fought him. Hallways twisted, stairs led nowhere, doors vanished. Then, her voice. Cecilia, not speaking, singing. A lullaby in a language older than words. He followed it, pushing through a narrow gap in the wall, crawling on hands and knees. The passage led to a bedroom. Hers, small, simple. Drawings pinned to every wall. Dozens. Each one of him. Falling, changing, vanishing. She sat on the bed, hands folded, eyes calm. Jonathan collapsed to the floor, breath heaving. "Help me," he whispered. She only looked at him, then smiled. The wall behind her opened, like lungs taking in air. Vines reached out, wrapped her gently. She didn't resist. She vanished into the wall, smiling as if finally free. The wall closed. The room dimmed. Jonathan was alone. And for the first time he understood. Cecilia hadn't been trapped. She'd been waiting. And now the house was ready for him. The hallway ended where it should not have. There was no wall, no barrier, just absence, as if the house had run out of space or the concept of space had simply unraveled. In that void stood a door. It shimmered faintly, its surface not wood, not glass, but something between. Reflections flickered on it. Memories, maybe. Jonathan saw himself standing in the garden at age 12, then in Boston, holding blueprints with shaking hands. Then here, now, bleeding at the fingertips. The door hadn't been there before, but it had always been meant for him. He stepped closer. No handle, no keyhole. Only the shimmer. He touched it, The surface rippled under his fingers like liquid resisting pressure. A voice rose, not from the house, not from within, but from the door itself. "Choose." He stepped back. Choose what? The door pulsed. Visions burst across his mind like lightning. Cecilia, smiling as she vanished. Elias, young and terrified, standing at the same threshold. Henry Baines, eyes hollow, body pressed against stone. And himself, hundreds of versions, each broken in different ways. Behind him the hallway narrowed. The house wanted a decision. "Let me out," Jonathan said. The shimmer darkened, not without cost. He saw it clearly then. A future where he escaped. Boston again. Work. Reputation. But he wasn't whole. He would draw rooms without knowing why. Hear footsteps when alone. Dream only of hallways. The house would never let go. The other future waited behind the door. Stillness. Silence. Merging. He turned to run, but the corridor behind him was gone. Only the door remained. His hand lifted without command, touched the surface again. This time it opened. Light poured through, not bright, not blinding, just real. Warmth spilled over him. Grass, wind, sky, a field, and silence. He stepped forward. The moment his foot touched grass, something inside him cracked. Not pain, but release. The house was gone. Behind him the door stood open. The house no longer pulsed, no longer breathed. He looked down. His clothes were clean, hands steady, no blood. He turned, facing the horizon. The sun was setting, or rising. Time had no anchor. He walked forward, air crisp in his lungs, colors vivid, free. Then, movement. To his left, a tree. Beneath it, a figure. He approached slowly. It was Cecilia, older, eyes still calm. She smiled. "You made it," she said. Her voice was a whisper carried by wind. "I thought I was free," he replied. She shook her head gently. "You are, but not yet." He frowned. "What does that mean?" Cecilia raised a hand, pointing behind him. He turned. The door was still there, but now it reflected not the house, but a street. Boston, his apartment, a familiar train station, home, real home. The price shimmered in his chest. To go through, he had to leave something behind. He looked at Cecilia. "Will you come with me?" "I've already gone." And then she was gone again. He faced the door. It waited. He stepped forward. The shimmer shifted. Inside, he saw himself. Not as he was, but as he would be. A man who would always carry blueprints he didn't draw. Hands that remembered walls that never stood. Eyes that saw edges where there were none. He stepped through, and the door closed behind him. The city was louder than he remembered. Trolley bells, shouting vendors, the distant churn of machinery. Boston moved around him like a current, fast and indifferent. Jonathan stood at the edge of the station platform, suitcase in hand, clothes unfamiliar on his own body. The ticket in his pocket bore today's date. He didn't remember buying it. As he stepped onto the street, nothing felt quite real. People passed him, but none looked twice. The buildings were familiar but colder, angles too sharp. He crossed Beacon Street with caution, half expecting the ground to vanish beneath his feet. No one stopped him. No one asked where he had been. He found his apartment still standing, same door, same number. He unlocked it easily. Inside, dust, the couch covered in sheets. His notes gone. Mail piled by the door, all unopened, all addressed to Jonathan Ellis, but none forwarded. No record of absence, no notices, as if he'd never left. He moved through the space slowly. Something was missing. He opened drawers. Nothing. Tried to call a friend. The number rang and rang, no answer. He walked to the university where he'd once taught. The front desk clerk, young, polite, shook her head. No one by that name on faculty. He insisted. Gave details. She checked again. Nothing. He left, heart sinking. The records had been wiped, or had never existed. He stopped in front of a shop window. His reflection stared back. He leaned closer. His eyes were darker, not in color but in weight, as if they held too much of something that couldn't be named. A movement behind him. He turned. Nothing, just the street. That night he lay awake in bed. Every sound made him flinch, pipes creaking, wind tapping glass. He dreamt of staircases, always downward, always turning. He awoke at 3:17 a.m. exactly, sweating, hands aching. He looked to the desk beside him. Blueprints, fresh, drawn in ink that hadn't existed hours earlier. He hadn't drawn them, not consciously, but the lines were his. Precise, unnatural. He stood, trembling. The paper showed a house, rooms that bled into each other, no exits. He threw the pages into the fireplace, struck a match. They didn't burn. The ink shimmered, shifted, formed new shapes as the flames licked around them. He backed away in the mirror across the room, movement, not his. A flicker. He stared. A girl, Cecilia, watching from behind the glass. She blinked. Gone. He paced until sunrise. Sleep no longer held meaning. At noon he returned to the station, asked the clerk if anyone had sent a parcel. She shook her head, but as he turned to leave, she called after him. "Sir, this came in for you earlier today." She handed him an envelope, no return address. Inside, a single note, written in script he didn't recognize but somehow understood. "Do not ignore it. It's remembering you." Below, a crude sketch, a spiral. Faintly in the center, a shape began to form, a door. He crumpled the note, but even then, he could still feel the outline of the spiral in his palm. He closed his eyes and heard the house breathing. From hundreds of miles away, from under his skin, he hadn't left his apartment in 3 days. The drawings kept coming. At first, they appeared only at night, half-formed sketches on spare napkins, backs of envelopes, margins of books. Then, during waking hours, while cooking, while reading, while breathing, his hands moved without instruction, circles, angles, endless corridors. A shape resembling a house yet utterly alien. Jonathan had stopped fighting it, until the letter arrived. It was waiting on his doorstep. Same seal, same parchment, same script. He opened it with dread and inevitability braided together. Inside, a commission, elegant, formal. "Mr. Ellis, we require your expertise on a structure most urgent. Blueprints to follow. Work must begin immediately. Travel arrangements enclosed." There was no signature, just a stamp, a spiral with a single dot at its center. His hands shook. He flipped the envelope. A ticket. Train to Maine. Departure. Dawn. He dropped it onto the table and backed away. The walls of the apartment seemed closer now. He turned to the mirror. There it was again. Behind him. The hallway. From the house. Faint. Fading. But it was there. He closed his eyes. He had escaped. He had walked through the door. But now, it was calling him back. That night he dreamt again. The house stood in a field of ash, its walls breathing, waiting inside Elias, and another figure, too blurred to name. He stood at the gate, in his hand, a blueprint. He woke up before sunrise. The ticket still lay on the table. He packed nothing. At the station, no one questioned his presence. The train was half empty, fog clinging to the windows like memory. He stared out, watching the world blur into trees. His reflection in the glass wasn't quite right. The eyes moved slower than the face. When he blinked, they didn't. He looked down at his hands. They moved. Drew. On his sleeve, his finger traced lines in dust. An entrance hall, a split staircase, a door with no hinges. He cursed and pulled his hand away, but the pattern remained. Etched into the fabric, he clenched his fists, tried to breathe. The train began to slow. The landscape was familiar, the trees too quiet, the air too still. No conductor announced the stop, no signs marked the station. He stepped off. The platform was wooden, crooked, half-rotted. Beyond it, a path. He followed, no map in his hand this time. He didn't need one. The route was inside him. A compass in his ribs, the forest pressed close. The silence screamed. Birds watched without blinking. Branches swayed without wind. And then, clearing. The house stood exactly as it had, no older, no different, untouched by time. But it knew he had returned. He approached slowly. No gate barred his way. The air shimmered faintly like heat over stone. His foot crossed the threshold of the grass. He heard it. Welcome back. Not in words, in sensation. A pulse in his teeth, a vibration in his spine. He opened his satchel. No sketches, no tools. But his hand moved anyway. Fingers splayed, searching the air like a blind man finding walls. The lines began to form, though no ink traced them. They drew themselves, the house feeding off his thoughts, shaping around his memory. He was already working. The restoration had begun. And this time there would be no forgetting. There was no village, no Harrowick, no inn, no post office, just forest. Jonathan stood at the edge of the path, heart frozen in his chest. The trees were denser than before. The road he had once taken now led nowhere, swallowed by moss, roots, and silence. The sky above was colorless, not grey, not blue. Just absence. And still the house stood, perfect, untouched, waiting. He approached slowly, step by step, as if returning to a grave he once denied was his. The grass bent away from his feet. The air tightened around his lungs. This was not return. This was absorption. The house didn't reveal its entrance. It didn't need to. Jonathan reached the blank wall where the door had once been. He placed his hand on the stone. It yielded. With a sound like breath held too long, the surface folded inward. A corridor welcomed him. He entered. No resistance. The house recognized him. He walked through familiar rooms, yet not quite the same. They had shifted in his absence, refined, every detail tailored. A chair from his childhood home, a coat rack from his first office, a hallway echoing the hospital where his father died. This was not memory. This was construction. The house had been building him, preparing. He passed a mirror. His reflection turned a moment too late. He didn't flinch. Not this time. He reached the parlor, and Elias was there, waiting by the fire. Jonathan froze. The man looked older, tired. But something was wrong. His posture, his hands, the way he smiled. Familiar, too familiar. Jonathan stepped closer and saw it. The face was his, not a copy, not a mask, but his, years older, eyes deeper, lines across the brow that hadn't yet formed. He whispered, "What are you?" The other Jonathan, Elias, smiled gently. "What you will become." Jonathan backed away. "No, it's already begun. I'm not you. You weren't." Jonathan turned to run. The room stretched. The door bent away. Walls curved like muscle tightening. The floor split under his feet, revealing veins of stone pulsing with light. He fell. Not down, but inward, into a version of the house he hadn't yet seen. Here, the rooms were endless. Hallways looped. Stairs led only deeper. Shadows watched from corners that refused to hold shape. Every doorway opened into another hymn. In one he was building. In another he was screaming. In another, silent, fused into the wall. The house was not made of wood and stone. It was made of memory, of identity, of repetition. It had been waiting for him to complete it. And now, with every breath, he was drawing the final walls. He stopped. Let the stillness settle. "I see you," he whispered. And the house answered, not with sound, but with clarity. A single thought pressed into his mind. You are the room. He closed his eyes and remembered the spiral, the blueprint, the floor. Every house had one, even this. Especially this. He had to find it, before he vanished completely. Before Elias became all that remained, the house would not let him leave. Every step he took circled back. Every turn ended in the same hall, same portrait, same flickering lamp overhead. His own eyes stared at him from every reflection now, distorted, stretched, echoing versions. He ran his fingers along the wall, desperate to feel something solid. It pulsed. Warm. Alive. He pressed harder. It throbbed beneath his skin. He stepped back. "No," he whispered, but the wall remembered him. He moved through a dining room shaped like the one from his grandmother's house, though she had died before he ever saw it built. The chairs were filled with people he could almost name, none of them moving, faces blurred like memories corrupted by time. He didn't call out. They would not answer. He passed through a study. Bookshelves towered to the ceiling, filled with journals, all titled Jonathan Ellis. He pulled one down, flipped it open. Blank. The next one, his handwriting. Childhood thoughts, fear of darkness, fear of being forgotten. The next, sketches of rooms. The next, blueprints. Each journal contained a piece of him. He dropped the book. His hands were fading, not disappearing, just less. Edges smoothed. Fingers softer. He ran. The hallway stretched again. Paintings blinked as he passed. He turned a corner, stopped. Ahead, dozens of people stood inside glass rooms, trapped, still. Some paced, some screamed, most wept. Each room a custom cell, a design tailored to contain only them. He recognized the patterns. They were his. Rooms he'd once imagined, concepts he'd drawn and forgotten. And now they were real. He pressed a hand to the glass of one cell. Inside, a woman sat holding a cracked teacup, rocking slowly. She didn't look up. On the wall behind her, scribbled in red, "Built for me, built by him." Jonathan stumbled back. Every room in this house had a name. Every name was his. He turned, trembling. The mirror at the end of the corridor shimmered. It no longer showed a reflection. It showed a blueprint of him, bones labeled, thoughts diagrammed, a living plan, and the caption beneath it, "Final element, integration." He dropped to his knees, felt the floor beneath him harden. His legs wouldn't move. Stone crept up his thighs. The house was claiming him, not with chains, with purpose. He was its final wall, the closing arch, the loop. He screamed. No one heard. But then, a sound, a whisper, not from the house, from inside his mind. There is always a flaw. He grasped it like a rope. Yes, every structure had one, even this. He closed his eyes, reached inward, past the pain, past the confusion, past even the memories the house had replaced, and found it. A crack, a single flaw in the foundation, buried deep. He'd left it once accidentally as a child, a corner that didn't align, a line that curved just off the axis. He had to find it again, before the house finished building him, before the walls were complete. He forced himself to stand. The stone fought back. But he moved. One step, then another. His breath burned, limbs heavy. But he walked, not away, toward the center. Where the floor still echoed. The house shook, it knew, it feared. The walls groaned, doors slammed shut. But it was too late. He remembered the error. He remembered himself. And the house could not hold both. The house was quiet now, no breath, no heartbeat, just stillness. Jonathan stood at the center, surrounded by walls he had once shaped, walls now trembling at the floor he had found. It was small, barely visible, a misaligned seam where two corridors met, a space where logic broke, a place the house had overlooked. He pressed his hand to it, and the structure recoiled. Light cracked through the ceiling like veins rupturing. He pushed harder. His name echoed around him, spoken in 100 voices, all his own. Ellis, Jonathan, Builder, Mirror. The walls screamed. And then, silence. He opened his eyes. The room was gone. He was standing outside. No trees, no sky. Only fog. The house behind him, still whole, but sealed, like a sculpture too heavy to move. His hands were his again, skin, bone, memory. He stepped forward. Nothing resisted. He walked through the mist and it parted for him. And just like that, he was forgotten. Boston didn't know his name. The innkeeper had never heard of him. The library ledger was blank, no trace, no mention, as if the house had eaten his identity and spat out only the shell. But he was free, mostly. He found an apartment in a quiet part of the city, took a new name, took no work. Each day he watched the fog through his window, waiting for it to shift. Years passed, but he never returned. Until one day, someone knocked. A stranger stood at the door, young, confident, blueprint under his arm. "Are you Mr. Ellis?" the boy asked. Jonathan froze. "No." The boy hesitated. "I'm sorry. I must have made a mistake. I was told you were the man to speak to about architectural anomalies." Jonathan didn't move. The boy looked down, embarrassed. "There's a house," he said, "in Maine. No one knows who built it, but my name, it was written on the wall." Jonathan's breath caught. The boy thanked him and left. Jonathan stood at the threshold. He understood now. The house wasn't finished. It never would be, because it didn't end. It simply chose again, and again, and again. From the street corner, the wind whispered a familiar rhythm, steps, breath, invitation. Jonathan turned away. But he knew. One day someone else would walk through the field. One day someone else would find the spiral. One day someone else would build a home without exits. And the door would open. Because the house remembers. Always. If you've made it this far, thank you. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that stay with you long after the final word. And click the video now on screen. Just make sure the door behind you stays shut.